Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So this hour, Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump are set to talk for a second time today to address U.S. tariffs and Canada's countermeasures. Now, this morning, Trump doubled down with reporters about tariffs and about Canada becoming a 51st state. Amid the rhetoric, we're asking you, how is this affecting your own personal and business relationships with Americans? Call us on that. After 12:30, a supply chain expert explains how tariffs would actually work. And you can call in with your questions. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. We're waiting to see if any more comments come from Justin Trudeau or Donald Trump following their scheduled conversation this hour. Now, earlier this morning, Donald Trump spoke to reporters at the White House, and he spoke to why he wants to impose those 25% tariffs on Canada, and he repeated in strong terms his desire for Canada to become the 51st state.
As a state, it's different. As a state, it's much different, and there are no tariffs. So I'd love to see that, but some people say that would be a long shot. If people wanted to play the game right, it would be 100% certain that they'd become a state. But a lot of people don't like to play the game because they don't have a threshold of pain.
That rhetoric and the threat of tariffs does have Canadians reacting, including sports fans. This weekend at Toronto Raptors and a number of hockey games, the crowd booed the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Here's what it sounded like at the Vancouver Canucks game.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held?
And this morning, Premier David Eby spoke to reporters as well and addressed the tariffs. And he said they erode the friendship between Canada and the U.S.
We believe that we are a friend and an ally of the United States with shared values around democracy and human rights. And we've demonstrated that through generations. We want to get back on that track with the president as we've gone through this period of retaliating against Americans, and we continue to support that. The absurdity of this, of allies and neighbors hurting each other, has really, I think, come home to many British Columbians and Canadians. I know people are angry and upset, and I'm angry and upset that we're being targeted in this way. And we are going to stand up. We're not going to roll over. We're not going to be the 51st state. And I know that at some point, we're going to get to that state of agreement again with the United States.
Well, we're taking your calls. How is the Canada-U.S. looming trade war affecting your own personal or business relationships with Americans? What have your own conversations with Americans been like? If you're an American living here in BC, we'd love to hear from you as well. And are these threats of tariffs impacting your business with U.S. buyers or suppliers? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll go to your calls in a few minutes. Right now, BC's lumber industry is bracing for impact. Kurt Niquidet is president of the BC Lumber Trade Council and joins me now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. First, can you take us through the numbers so we can understand what kind of impact these tariffs might have? How much BC lumber is exported to the United States? What proportion of their market does BC make?
Yeah, overall for Canada as a whole, we actually make up about 25% of the U.S. market. For British Columbia, we're the largest producer within Canada. It's about 40% of Canadian shipments come from British Columbia. And for British Columbia, softwood lumber is really important for our overall exports. We exported about 11 billion worth of forest products last year, and about 5 billion of that was softwood lumber. And overall, for the province of British Columbia, softwood lumber and other forest products are really important. It's our number 2 export category.
Okay, and we have heard that BC may be less impacted by tariffs overall because there are partners in Asia and an increased trade with Asia. But Premier Eby said this morning he is particularly worried about the lumber industry here. What exactly would it mean then if there were now an added 25% tariff? Because you're already dealing with a 14.4% ongoing tariff, right, on softwood lumber. So what would an added 25% tariff do in terms of those exports?
Yeah, I mean, that's the critical point, is we're already facing 14% duties. And some of our projections are that those duties could go up for later this year. And then adding on top of that, the 25% broad-based tariff is going to be very significant. It's going to have significant impacts on our exports. And we've been emphasizing the impacts on both sides of the border. As I mentioned earlier, forest products from Canada are really important for the U.S., and it's just going to drive up costs in the U.S., and it has socioeconomic impacts in Canada as it affects production.
You're talking about impacts on workers and their families. Can you tell me more? Do you have any specifics in terms of how many jobs could be at risk should that production have to reduce?
Sure, yeah. Overall, the forest sector in British Columbia supports about 100,000 jobs. That's both direct and indirect jobs. And really that's, if we sort of see an impact on the direct impact on the forest sector, it has those ripple effects throughout the supply chain. And then so many communities within British Columbia are highly dependent on the forest sector. And so we're quite concerned about those impacts, and we'll be working with the province to ensure that workers and communities are supported.
What does that support look like?
Well, it can take several different, forms. One of the things that we've been looking at is for loan guarantees for producers. This just helps them to stay liquid through this time, and that actually ends up helping them to continue to support their workers and communities. And so there's a number of different things, and we'll be working not only with the province, but also with the federal government on potential measures as we go through this.
Let me ask you, as you said, the lumber industry has its own specific situation in this, given the amount that is exported to the U.S. And President Trump has specifically pointed out lumber and said, we can produce our own. We have our own forests here. And this morning he did repeat it. He said, we don't need them to give us lumber. Couldn't they fill that 25% gap themselves? And can you really blame them for pursuing that?
Well, I don't think that's really true. I think currently, given their demand, they only supply about 70% of their domestic needs. And so they're importing 30% from elsewhere, and the majority of that is coming from Canada. And so when you sort of impose these duties and tariffs, that increases the cost of those imports. And so what we expect is that we just see price increases in the U.S. And so they can provide a little bit more lumber within their supply, but there's no way that they can replace the imports coming from Canada.
And what about Canada and BC replacing the U.S. as an import market? Premier Eby has been talking more about diversification of trade partners. How likely is that for the lumber industry?
Well, it's something that we've been working on for a long time, diversifying our markets. And in British Columbia, we're better positioned than other parts of Canada to diversify our markets, in particular to the Asia-Pacific region. But there's limited opportunities for that. It's something that we should pursue, and this is an area where we can get support from the province and the federal government on. There's a lot of competition in the global marketplace, and so we have to make sure that we're competitive in those markets. But it is something that we will be pursuing, and I think, though, it's important to acknowledge that the U.S. is just so important for the softwood lumber industry in British Columbia. about 75% of our exports are destined to the U.S.
Well, we'll watch this closely, as I'm sure you are as well. Kurt, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Kurt Niquidet is president of the BC Lumber Trade Council. We are asking you, how is this looming Canada-U.S. trade war affecting your personal or business relationships with Americans? And has that tariff threat affected your business with perhaps U.S. buyers or suppliers? Have you talked to Americans yourselves? What have those conversations been like? I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Joseph is calling us from Vancouver. Hi, Joseph. Welcome. Hi, Joseph. Are you there? Okay, I have to move on. My apologies. Rob is joining us from Langford. Hi, Rob. What are your thoughts? How does this affect the relationships among Canadians and Americans? Rob, are you there? It sounds like we might be having some trouble with our phone lines. Okay, we have some issues with our phone lines and our calls have dropped off, unfortunately. Love to hear from you, though. We're going to try and get to your calls. Right now, we have some emails. And the topic of the national anthem, the U.S. anthem being booed, seems to have resonated with some of our email writers here, as it did happen over the weekend at a number of hockey games and at the Raptors basketball game as well. Avis writes, I saw the YouTube of the Ottawa Senators and Minnesota Wild reaction to the singing of the U.S. anthem. I think it would have been far more effective if the Canadians had remained sitting in their seats and booing rather than standing. Thank you, Avis. Joanne writes, why are anthems sung at beginning of sports games? Seems like it is patriotism at its worst. I understand frustrations, but Trump won't be affected, just breaks down relations with neighbors, and ask the NHL why this practice of the anthems. And Kurt writes as well on the topic of the 51st state. Amazing that Trump is oblivious to the fact that his election and behavior makes more remote every day the already vanishing likelihood that Canada will want to join the, he calls it, clown show south of the border. And Kurt describes himself as a dual U.S.-Canada citizen, moved permanently to Canada in 2009 and grateful every day since. And as we try to fix our phone lines here, we have some more emails now. Scott writes from Burnaby about what he calls a smarter response to U.S. tariffs. Canada has a way to neutralize U.S. tariffs by issuing tariff-free export quotas for key goods like oil, gas, and electricity. So these would be allocated to provinces. They'd sell them to U.S. importers, and this system would lower the effective price of Canadian imports, offset the tariffs, and generate even greater provincial revenue through royalties. So instead of losing billions to U.S. tariffs, Canada could keep the money at home and ensure that exports stay competitive. Okay, thank you very much. And the federal government did issue its own list of countervailing tariffs as well over the weekend. And they were quite wide-ranging as well. Tariffs on U.S. goods coming in, including orange juice, peanut butter, wine, spirits, beer, coffee, appliances, apparel, footwear, motorcycles, cosmetics, and pulp and paper. And so what Canada announced was tariffs on what they measured as about $30 billion in goods, effective February 4th, when the U.S. tariffs come into effect. They said they would also add another list of U.S. imports to be subject to tariffs. So that was the countermeasures announced by Justin Trudeau. And as you heard, David Eby as well talked about the liquor stores here in BC not importing bourbon or alcohol from red states. We heard that as well. So how is this all affecting your relationships with Americans, whether it's business relationships, personal relationships? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And I think our phone lines are working now. Jerome is calling from Coquitlam. Hi, Jerome.
Hello, good morning.
Hi. Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for calling in. What are your thoughts then on this looming trade war?
Yeah, I wanted to react on the lumber conversation you just had with one of your sector specialists. If we have a surplus of lumber and we also are dealing with another crisis, which is the house pricing, why are we not turning back our lumber own products to our own crisis and then build what we need to build at a lower cost? And maybe the government needs to do a top up. That's fine if we need to, sustain the sector if there's a loss there. But just let's not, waste this crisis any further, and then just use the product that we have internally to solve the crisis that we already have internally.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jerome. And I imagine supply chain has something to do with that, with regard to whether you sell lumber, you sell value-added products. But we're going to ask our supply chain expert about that question of whether, if we are trying to expand trade across provinces and lower those barriers, interprovincial trade barriers, whether it's addressing needs here, as you say, the housing crisis, can BC lumber, Canadian lumber, be used toward that equation? So thank you very much. I'll make a note of that and ask our supply chain expert. Okay, thank you. Anton take care. Anton is on the line on Bowen Island. What are your thoughts on all this rhetoric, Anton?
Well, by the way, I agree with Jerome. All the rest. Well, I think the issue that is really distracting us from some real issues that Trump has been saying about the 51st state being Canada. He has some bad ideas in mind, and what we've seen as well, that Musk is taking over Treasury in the United States right now. There's a few other things happening in the States where we should really take notice of. When it comes to the relationship with the United States, I'm immigrant, recent from 1999, and I've always been surprised about Canadians saying about Americans, they are our friends. How I see it, coming from the Netherlands, we don't talk about the Germans or the Belgians as our friends. We regard them as a foreign country, and I think the Canadians will be wise to do it towards the United States as well. They're a foreign country, and they will do what's in their best interest, always. When it comes to forestry, I've worked for the Wilderness Committee for a long time, and they published, early 1990s, they published a paper on value-added manufacturing in Canada using wood in Canada. But what we've seen since is export of raw logs, raw products to Asia and to the United States. Right. So this call earlier about we have to do value-added, and I totally agree with that. But we have the conversation for the last 40 years now. Yeah, and that's really the problem. And those companies, those forest companies who have been working in Canada when the tariffs went up, they moved their mills. They closed their mills in the BC where there was value-added manufacturing happening, and they moved it to the United States. So let's take note.
Yeah, could this then prompt more action on that part? As you said, this has been a decades-long debate, right, about value-added production, but so have countervailing duties on lumber specifically going into the United States. Like, could this actually move that conversation forward?
Well, I hope so. Finally, that's all I can, because I think the force he said use it to deflect from their business model, which seems to work for them, having their mills in the United States and sending their wood down there, and then shipping the value-added products back to Canada, and we pay a premium for it. So we have to have that conversation, and we have to have, because we can. I moved here for one of the reasons because it's incredible wood that you have in BC. And it was so poorly used and so poorly utilized. And I, as an engineer and industrial designer, you can do so much with it. And if you start to develop good wood products that people need you have a market.
Yeah.
But that has never been done.
Yeah, maybe, perhaps. I mean, that's part of the conversation. And some may say,
Well,
hey, is this the opportunity? Anton, I do have to wrap up. Thank you
Okay,
so
sure,
much for your call.
okay.
Nice to hear from you.
Okay, bye.
That's
Bye, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Anton on Bowen Island. Thank you very much. It is 12:56 now. This is BC Today. And our next caller is Jillian in Vancouver. Hi, Jillian. Hi,
I
Jill.
just wanted to just add my 2 cents worth. I grew up with my father, Mel Hertig, who hardly fought that first free trade agreement with Brian Mulroney. And one of the things that he said, even way back then, was that if you want decisions about our country to be made in the South, you will find this free trade agreement. And every free trade agreement after has continued to show that to be true until you get this particular man here, and it is the worst that it could ever be. He is now making us spend money where we had no intention of spending money on the borders. And not to mention that one of the very first things that first trade agreement had in it was about our water. Trump wants our water. There's no doubt about it. We have more water than they ever will. And there's an undercurrent, if you excuse the pun, of our water. So it's so complicated, but until people really start to think about, and people called it protectionism back then, which was crazy and ludicrous, and here we are now.
Jillian, thank you very much. The water question, I've heard it percolating in some corners as well. Don't you know? And you can think for yourself as to how far you like to take that. But that is a question I've heard. Haven't heard Donald Trump talk about it. And you mentioned your father was Mel Hertig, and he was an activist and a political candidate as well. And as you mentioned, he fought against the original NAFTA. Good to hear from you, Jillian. Nice to hear your perspective on this. It is now just about 12:28. This is BC Today. Taking your calls, asking you, is the impending trade war, the rhetoric around BC and Canada and the United States, is it affecting your own personal or business relationships with Americans? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Harry has a comment on that from Vancouver. Hi, Harry. Go ahead. Thanks so much for calling.
Oh, hi. It's not about that. It was about your last stuff, but I'll just get it in quickly.
Sure.
I just don't think Canadians should be saying derogatory things to the American citizens. It's not their fault. It's because you have it's a political issue. And booing at the hockey games, that is just showing such poor sportsmanlike support for the hockey teams. The teams are all mixed with Americans and Canadians. How do you think those people feel when the Canuck fans are all booing? That was embarrassing to see that and hear that.
Yeah, what do you think of how would the singer be feeling, I suppose, too?
What was that? Sorry?
How would the singer be feeling as opposed as well, right?
Well, totally. The lady was sitting there in her chair. That's really... Canadians got to wake up to everything. It's not just about Trump. It's about, it's oppression against the people, all the way that these companies are all making all the poorer people pay for everything. Why don't they start forking out some of their profits? That's all I got to say. Thank you so much.
Okay, Harry, nice to hear from you. Thank you for the call from Vancouver. And let's squeeze in John in Vernon. Hi, John. Thanks for calling.
Oh, yeah. Hi. I've been following this pretty closely. I'm getting old now, but I've been following this trade thing from the 1960s. But what I'd like to say about it is that the take that is being given us isn't what is happening. What is happening is that Trump has found a way to raise money to fund his business of government. And these people aren't facing reality because there's a World Trade Organization that would settle the tariff issue if taken to them. It isn't about the tariffs. it's about the money that government needs. Both Trudeau and Trump are filling their pockets with money.
Well, it would be government coffers, right? Not their personal pockets.
Well, yeah, well, sure. I mean, and they can't get it. Well, for example, the issue that Trump is playing at is the failure of the free trade agreement to cover a certain number of areas like lumber and aluminum and steel and those things that are being put into 25% tariff brackets.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that those should be settled by the World Trade Organization. That's what it's set up to do.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that because then they don't get the money that they need. Both Trump and both United States and Canada government have huge deficits. And they're funding their ongoing daily business by doing tariffs. And that's why I think Trudeau hasn't taken that's why our Prime Minister hasn't taken Trump to the World Trade Organization to settle it civilly.
Okay, John, thank you so much for that question and that comment. And interesting that there is now this. Remember, shortly after inauguration, Donald Trump said that he had created an agency to collect those tariffs once they were put in place as well. So that's an interesting point as a way of addressing the deficit when it comes to the tariffs. John, thank you for the call from Vernon. We're going to continue to take your calls on the impending tariffs about to be put in place and imposed tomorrow. That's the day that was announced over the weekend by President Donald Trump. And Canada announced countervailing measures as well. Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump supposed to be talking this hour. We'll try and update you on that if there's any update and any commentary following their conversation, asking you how is this all affecting your own interactions, your personal or business relationships with Americans. We'll go back to your questions and your comments right after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Premier David Eby says he has talked with leaders of major mining and refining companies in BC, and they say they are redirecting critical minerals and energy products to markets outside the United States. Eby told a news conference in North Vancouver today that a historic reordering of global trading patterns is underway and BC will not be left out. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, meanwhile, is speaking with President Donald Trump on the phone for the second time today to discuss the threat of U.S. tariffs coming in tomorrow. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says U.S. tariffs on Mexico are being put on hold for a month. She says she had a positive conversation with Trump this morning, and they agreed Mexico will immediately deploy 10,000 National Guard troops to the Mexico-U.S. border. And BC's Highway Patrol says treacherous conditions on Highway 1 through Langley and the Fraser Valley are leading to intermittent shutdowns. Corporal Michael McLaughlin says there are likely icy conditions all the way to Hope. He says drivers shouldn't be using Highway 1 unless necessary. And now taking a look at the forecast, extreme conditions are expected along Vancouver Island and most coastal sections of BC, with snowfall, Arctic outflow, and extreme cold warnings in effect. On the north coast, sunny this afternoon with a high of 7, highs around -28 and mainly sunny in the Peace. In the central interior, clearing this afternoon with a high of -18, highs around -1 with some flurries in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a chance of flurries with highs to -6. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, flurries this afternoon with highs around +1. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. And we are waiting to see any readout or any comments on social media or otherwise following this second phone call today between Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau. And this morning, the Prime Minister's office did tell CBC through a spokesperson that they spoke about trade and the border and confirmed they would connect again this afternoon. And they put a time at 12 noon Pacific. So waiting to see any result from that conversation. We've been asking you as well what impact this might be having on your own interactions or relationships with Americans. Catherine writes from Langley, I've just spent the morning canceling several of the U.S. subscriptions I've had. One of the things I find most annoying is that neither Canada nor Mexico has mentioned the huge volume of firearms that pours through the border from the U.S. into both our countries. Why is that never mentioned? Varista writes, yearly I would spend almost $20,000 US traveling and vacationing in the United States, taking my 4 kids to Disney World, traveling to different states for tourism. This year I'm planning to stay in Canada, and I'd recommend Canadians spend their money in their own economy. Nick writes from Revelstoke, yesterday Trump said that he loves the Canadian people. That is a sort of domineering love that demands total submission and puts battered partners in the hospital. We should make clear that we reject this love, and he's not welcome on Canadian soil. Some strong words there, certainly from Nick. Thanks so much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, how is the impending Canada-U.S. trade war affecting your personal or business relationships with Americans? What have your own conversations with Americans been like? And are the tariff threats impacting your own business? Perhaps you deal with U.S. buyers or U.S. suppliers. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. And as we've been hearing, businesses across BC are preparing for tariffs to come into effect overnight. Premier Eby was speaking this morning at a North Vancouver shipyard, and he said that the business sector is looking for alternative destinations for their products.
Now, major firms in British Columbia are in the process of redirecting their critical minerals, their energy products, to markets outside the United States to respond to the tariff threat. This isn't to punish the Americans. This isn't anything else. This is in response to tariffs that have been put on by the United States. And there is just no way that gives Americans more affordable groceries, more prosperous future, more efficient industry. But it is what BC firms will do, and we'll support them in doing that to make sure they're protecting jobs for British Columbians as we diversify our economy across the globe. It's a very serious time for British Columbians. Our government stands with you, stands with all Canadians to push back on this threat.
That's Premier Eby speaking this morning. Well, to talk more about just how integrated the U.S. and Canadian markets are and how complicated tariffs would be for the global supply chain, Adel Guitouni joins me. He's an expert in the global supply chain management and a professor at the Gustafson School of Business at the University of Victoria. Hello, Adel. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Can you describe, and perhaps in some detail, just how integrated the supply chain is when it comes in between Canada and the United States?
It is highly integrated, and actually the economy in North America is more, at least between Canada and U.S., is more integrated north-south than actually east-west. So just to give you a few numbers, we exchange about $2 billion of goods and services between the two countries every day. On top of that is probably more actually the energy sector, so 33.5%, about $200 billion annually. But just to give you another kind of indicator to see how integrated it is. So if you think about automotive, for example, sector and manufacturing, so we exchange about $70 billion annually, and a car, for example, crosses the boundary probably 7 times before it is being finished and delivered. So that's a lot of and machinery and agriculture. So all sector, health, are highly integrated.
Right, and you talk about that back and forth before you get to the final product. You know, we've spoken with a wine producer here in Penticton who said that last year, due to the cold snap, they had to source their grapes from Washington State, and to deal with that shortfall Reading in the Globe and Mail this morning about blueberry producers who, because of dealing with disease, have had to get their bushes from Portland. And so
Yeah.
how difficult is it? How challenging can it be to actually determine whether a product is Canadian or American?
Oh, it's very tough, but then it becomes actually the question. First, this will add a huge complexity for many companies because, again, this kind of integration in the content and of the different products. And it's going to add a huge administrative burden because each time that you have actually a load that is moving in one direction or the other, you need actually to determine how those tariffs would be applied to it. So it adds a lot of burden, a lot of problems. And I know that many companies, they have been foreseeing this coming, so they have been stockpiling before. But each time that you have this kind of integration, you have to move back and forth. You need actually to have a lot of support, a lot of paperwork, and declaration. This would be a headache for customers as well.
How so?
Oh, because again, if you start really going through these now additional scrutiny that you need to put in every product that is going back and forth, you need actually the customs to go over that and check it and audit it from time to time, so they don't do for every kind of thing that is moving, because it's trust-based system, but. They need actually to also to double check it from time to time, and they need to go through all of those details. And many people are still trying to figure out how that would work.
And the cost, I imagine. I mean, you're talking about tariffs. Will they be applied on each leg of that supply chain? If you have countervailing tariffs as well, plus the cost of administration, as you say. I mean, I can't imagine what that would end up as when it comes to price.
So yeah, the overhead and the price, and by the way, for people to know that the ripple effect, and I hope actually this will be resolved in a few weeks, because I think in both sides will feel the pain very, very quickly. But some of these additional costs will probably see the ripple effect that will take time to materialize. For example, a car, we talked about car crossing multiple times, but the car takes a few months, few weeks to produce. So then any content that has been affected by these tariffs will be carried for a long period of time. So it's not the moment that we stop actually the tariffs, everything goes back to normal. And we know actually the prices, they go up, they don't go down. So a lot of things that will be now, we will feel it. And I like actually what I heard now from Premier Eby and others is really Canada should start diversifying its markets, because there is a lot of unpredictability now with the changes of administration in the U.S.
And BC, in fact, is more inured to this, apparently, because we have been looking towards Asian trading partners. I mean, can that be expanded on then?
It can be, and the bad news or the good news, I don't know where you would like to be sitting, is for example, the GDP of the BRICS has already overtaken the GDP of the G7. This is just to give you an indicator. So the world is bigger in terms of the US continue to be the biggest economy in the world, but there are a lot of other kind of markets that are being developed, and BC, yes, is very well positioned into the Asia Pacific, even actually South America, and so on. So it's not just limited to this, what is going on in the US. Don't get me wrong. I think the U.S. should continue to be a very important market for BC and the country. But and among all the countries that are being hit by tariff, which is really surprising, is U.S. has a positive. If you remove the energy, has a positive trade balance with Canada.
Right.
They are exporting more than actually what we are importing.
Let's take some calls here, because some are quite apropos to you. Adel, thank you very much for joining us. My guest is Adel Guitouni, who is a professor at the Gustafson School of Business at the University of Victoria, an expert in global supply management, global supply chain management. And Cody is joining us from Cranbrook. Hi, Cody. Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What are your thoughts or your questions?
Well, my thoughts and my question, I've got a lot of questions, but my thoughts are, like, why do we allow a foreign party to dictate
on our commerce. I don't understand why. So I'm just gonna have to read out. I was reading some notes here. So my number one question is, why does the United States? Why are they the governing body of the global economy? Like, why is everything measured in U.S. dollars?
They just, I mean, that would probably be just because they're the biggest economy.
Yes, absolutely, and I agree with that. But they're a failing economy. Anyway, that's just a comment. As a Canadian, I'm curious why we have not developed our own industries. We have oil, we have gas, we have lumber, we have all these resources, and what we do is we sell them off to the United States as a general rule, and then we have to pay extra to get our goods back. Why is Canada not manufacturing their own gasoline? Why is Canada not manufacturing their, all of the things that we use our basic resources for? And we just have to buy them back, and it's ridiculous. I believe that the Canadian government, through multiple generations, multiple whatever parties, we're just selling ourselves off. Like,
Cody,
and I hate to use the word.
It's a good question. Thank you very much for that. Why have we become so reliant on the U.S.? We had a question earlier from someone who asked, why are we exporting our lumber? We have a housing crisis here in Canada. So, Adel, is that something you talked about diversifying trade partners, but what about meeting the market and demand here with our own manufacturing, our own products?
I think actually there are many kind of yearly issues around this. So just to answer the question about why the dollar is really at the center, because this is goes back actually after the World War II, and when we created the Bretton Woods kind of agreement and the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, and how the dollar became actually central, and then
the U.S. dollar,
So the U.S. dollar and it's part central to the global trade. So that's really the historical. And then actually the U.S. with Nixon, they have stopped actually using actually the gold as standard, and then the U.S. dollar now became that kind of benchmark for the world trade. So and again, there is many other things that happen after that, and we can get into it, like how the system developed over the years. But the question is really how we are not self-reliant. I think. That is part of development economics, the economy, how we have developed it. But countries with the globalization started to become more and more kind of specialized. So what the globalization created is created this opportunity for different countries to become good in different things, and maybe outsource to other countries, and under the pressure of financial efficiency above all, we started really stretching these supply chains very thin around the world. And this is how China, for example, became the manufacturing hub of the world. But historically, Canada and the US has developed over centuries about this, more than a century actually, about this kind of trade. And along this border, and that's why I was saying is more north-south. So, for example, if you're in Quebec, it's easier to trade, for example, with New York than with BC. That is the historical. Now, Canada, I hope this is now the second wake-up call, because it's the second time that Trump has threatened Canada's economy. And we went through the cycle of renegotiating the North American trades.
And now we have Kuzma. Why do you call it a wake-up call?
Because you have, I understand that for Canadian is to have a very strong trade partner, but it's becoming unpredictable. And that's the problem that you have in development. So you need to start really diversify. You need to build resilience in the country. We had another wake-up call with the COVID, when we had actually to bring some of the pharmaceutical or the personal protective equipment to Canada, back to Canada. We're not able actually to protect the population. So globalization has a lot of advantage, but you need to build resiliency, redundancy. You need to start thinking about your like national security, your stability, and I think Canada should do more. First is really upgrading our value chain, because there are many things that we do because we try to trade raw material and resources where you can actually do transformation in Canada. And the second is diversifying the economy and have other partners where Canada can trade with and balance its trade. Yeah.
Yeah, let's take another call here. Really great to have your perspective on this and your expertise. Tom is calling us now from Campbell River. Hi there, Tom. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, what are your... go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment on, what's going on these days. And as an average Canadian and as an average British Columbian, my wife and I, look at what we can do locally and so on and so on. And I guess just to keep it short, one of the things we experienced on the weekend at our local grocery store was buying our regular shopping list, which wasn't extravagant by any means. It was just produce and, the basic staples and a few other items. But we made an effort, and it took a little bit longer in the store. And I had to put my reading glasses on to read the fine print on some of the labels. But
I'm there too, Tom. I'm there too.
We were able to find products that were Canadian, made in Canada, British Columbian, and so on and so on. And it took a little bit longer, but like I said, we all expect our leaders, our politicians to show us the way. But if there's anything we as just regular citizens can do, I believe that's one tool that we have in our kit. Just make the extra effort, have a look at what you're buying, where your dollars are going, and it feels pretty gratifying, actually. When we walked out of the store, we felt not so much better about ourselves, but at least we felt quite strongly that, we were doing what we could. And for us, like I say, well, that's good enough. That's all we can do, then so be it.
Tom, great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Tom,
thank you, Michelle.
Take care. Tom in Campbell River, and Heidi is up next now in Surrey. Hi, Heidi. What are your thoughts on the looming trade war and what it means for the relationships between Canadians and Americans?
Well, I have a little different feeling about it all. I understand the economic stress on Canada and all of us. I'm an immigrant 68 years ago, and I feel very protective about Canada. But what worries me is the focus on the gentleman that is in power in the United States, because power is Mr. Trump's oxygen, and we are, I wouldn't say victim, but we are the target, because he has 4 years to recharge his ego. And I'm a history buff, and I have seen a lot of people in power that have done terrible things to ordinary people. And I have little people growing up in my family, and I'm worried about them and the future. And the whole thing has, I must say, affected me a lot. I hope Canadians understand that Mr. Trump is maybe joking or maybe not joking, because he is a different creature than the rest of us. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope Canada will be the way it is and get better. And I'm very happy to be here, and I hope things are going well for all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good to hear from you and that perspective. We haven't heard this hour yet. But that, right, it may be a joke, maybe it's not a joke. That's kind of what everybody is trying to determine. And I wonder, Adel, I want to go back to Tom's call. The regular consumers, is there anything that they can do or need to do, or perhaps nothing?
No, actually, we can do. But before we talk about, so I would like also to remind everybody, this is a policy of a government, and it's not a policy of the people. So I think we need to be careful not to turn this into anti-Americans. So I think just to be careful, because people, and in my opinion, the states, especially those that are in the north of the U.S., would be suffering as much as we do, because actually a lot of their or maybe more, as they see these kind of tariffs being introduced in both sides of the border. But in terms of consumer, I think, yes, we do have a lot of choices to do. And I think we had this conversation before when we were even talking about the climate change. When we talked about the COVID. So if people start really making choices and stop being consumer and becoming customer. And this is really important, that we have this agency to make decisions about what we buy, how we can actually support businesses and products and so on that are aligned with our values, with our priorities and so on. I think we have this responsibility of moving the value chain toward where we want it to be. And this is a good example where we can support, for example, Canadian businesses. One of your callers saying why we don't have these in Canada. Maybe because we are not supporting them. If this becomes actually for us to pull on products that are made in Canada, that will encourage many entrepreneurs and businesses to start manufacturing in Canada. So at the end of the day, everybody that is in the business, they are trying to sell something to us. And we have that choice to make.
Yeah, thank you very much for that thought. My thought goes back to Tom. Even if you have to wear reading glasses to get to the fine print, that's the consciousness that you're trying to speak of. Adel, really good to have you. I appreciate your expertise this afternoon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Adel Guitouni is a professor at the Gustafson School of Business at the University of Victoria. And Lily wrote us from Roberts Creek, listening in on forestry. Yes to value added in Canada. Way less raw logs exported, please. Thank you very much for your email. And Margot writes from Haida Gwaii, I'm deeply saddened by the U.S. president's comments and insults to and about Canada. I have family in the U.S. and love to visit them, but I will not until the tenor from the U.S. changes. Margot, thank you. BC Today at cbc.ca is our email.